The moment my daughter pulled my newborn granddaughter away from my arms, the entire hospital room went silent. "I think it's better if you don't hold her right now," Vanessa said coldly, avoiding my eyes. I stood there frozen, still holding the tiny pink blanket I had spent 3 months knitting by hand. Ethan looked down at his phone. His mother smirked from the corner beside the window. Then Vanessa whispered the words that shattered me completely. "We're trying to keep a certain environment around the baby. A certain environment, as if I no longer belonged in my own daughter's life." I left the hospital smiling through tears, then sat in my car and made one phone call that changed everything. If this story touches your heart, let me know in the comments. Have you ever been hurt by someone you sacrificed everything for? I truly read every comment because stories like these remind us we're not alone. And before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. People look at me now and see a calm, older woman with silver hair, soft cardigans, and a quiet little house near Lake Michigan. They assume I've always lived this peaceful life. They don't see the years I spent sleeping on office couches, eating vending machine dinners, and crying in bathroom stalls, so my daughter would never see me break apart. My name is Juliana Freeman, and for most of my life, everything I did revolved around one person. Vanessa. She was only 9 years old when her father died. One moment, we were an ordinary Chicago family, arguing over pizza toppings and school grades. The next moment, I was standing in a hospital hallway, holding my husband's wedding ring in my hand, while a doctor explained cardiac arrest to me like it was supposed to make sense. Nothing made sense after that. Not the bills. Not the silence in our house. Not the way Vanessa stared at the front door every evening for almost a year, waiting for her father to walk back in. I still remember the night she crawled into my bed after the funeral and whispered, "Mom, if you die too, what happens to me?" That sentence changed my entire life. From that day forward, I worked like a woman being chased by fire. At first, I took every interior design project I could find. Tiny apartments, cheap office remodels, restaurants nobody cared about. During the day, I met clients with a smile on my face. At night, I sat at the kitchen table sketching furniture layouts while Vanessa slept beside me under a blanket because she hated being alone. Sometimes she would wake up around midnight and ask, "Are you still working?" And I would smile and tell her, "Just a little longer, sweetheart." The truth was, I was terrified all the time. Terrified of losing the house. Terrified of failing her. Terrified that one day she would realize her mother had no idea what she was doing. But somehow, year after year, things slowly changed. One client became 3. 3 became 10. Then a luxury hotel chain hired my company to redesign several properties across Illinois. That single contract changed everything for us. By the time Vanessa entered high school, Freeman Interiors had become successful enough that I could finally breathe without panic sitting on my chest every morning. And through all of it, Vanessa stayed close to me, closer than most daughters ever stay with their mothers. On Friday nights, we ordered Chinese food and watched old movies together in bed. She helped me pick fabric samples for clients. Sometimes she even fell asleep on the sofa in my office while I worked late. I still remember her at 16 sitting cross-legged on my office floor looking up at me and saying, "One day, Mom, I'm going to take care of you the way you take care of me." Back then, I believed her. Honestly, I think she believed it too. When Vanessa got accepted into Northwestern University, I cried harder than she did. Not because I was sad, because I knew how much her father would have loved seeing that moment. I paid every tuition bill without letting her take student loans. I bought her a small condo after graduation because I didn't want her struggling with rent in Chicago. When she got her first corporate job in marketing, I surprised her with a white Mercedes sedan she had once pointed at jokingly during college. "You deserve nice things," I told her. And for years, Vanessa hugged me every time I helped her. That's what makes this story hurt so much. The change didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, quietly, like watching sunlight disappear 1 inch at a time. Everything shifted after she met Ethan Carter. At first, I liked him. Most mothers probably would have. He was handsome in that polished American way, tailored suits, expensive watches, perfect teeth, calm voice. He worked in private investments and always knew the right thing to say at dinner parties. "Mrs. Freeman, your daughter is extraordinary. You raised an incredible woman. I admire strong women. Men like Ethan study people before they speak. They learn what others want to hear." And I wanted to believe Vanessa had finally found someone who would protect her. The first warning sign came during a charity gala downtown. I had spent the entire day preparing because Vanessa insisted I attend. I wore a navy blue dress I loved and a pair of pearl earrings my husband bought me years ago. When I arrived at Vanessa's condo, she looked me up and down strangely. "You're wearing that?" she asked. I laughed awkwardly. "Is something wrong with it?" She hesitated before saying, "It's just a little simple." Simple. That word sat in my chest the entire evening. After that, little comments started appearing everywhere. "Mom, maybe you should let me help update your wardrobe." "Mom, people in these circles notice presentation." "Mom, maybe don't mention discount shopping in front of Ethan's clients." Each comment sounded harmless by itself. Together, they slowly carved pieces out of me. Then came the spending. The bigger condo, the designer bags, the vacations to Napa Valley and Aspen, the private prenatal yoga classes after Vanessa got pregnant. At first, I thought they could afford it. Ethan constantly talked about investments and market opportunities. But something about it felt excessive. Forced. One evening during dinner at their house, Ethan poured himself a glass of wine and casually said, "People respect success they can see." Vanessa nodded immediately, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My daughter no longer cared about being happy. She cared about looking successful. Even worse, she seemed embarrassed by anyone who threatened that image, including me. Still, I ignored the feeling. Because mothers are experts at lying to themselves. We excuse behavior. We forgive too quickly. We convince ourselves love can survive anything. So when Vanessa announced her pregnancy, I truly believed everything would heal. I thought becoming a mother would remind her who she used to be. I spent months knitting blankets for the baby. I turned one of my guest rooms into a nursery corner. I even found Vanessa's old storybooks in the attic and cleaned every single page by hand. I imagined family dinners, Christmas mornings, holding my granddaughter while Vanessa laughed beside me the way she used to when she was little. I had no idea that the worst humiliation of my life was waiting for me inside that hospital room. And I definitely had no idea that one single moment would push me toward a decision capable of destroying the entire illusion Vanessa had built around her life. The strange thing about manipulative people is that they rarely arrive looking dangerous. If Ethan Carter had been rude from the beginning, I would have protected Vanessa immediately. If he had yelled at her, insulted her, or acted openly controlling, I would have recognized the threat. But men like Ethan don't operate that way. They smile first. They charm first. They make you question your instincts until you stop trusting yourself altogether. The first year Vanessa dated him, he behaved almost perfectly around me. He brought flowers whenever he visited my house. He called me Mrs. Freeman with polite respect. He asked thoughtful questions about my interior design company and complimented my work in ways that sounded genuine. One Thanksgiving, he even stood beside me in the kitchen, drying dishes while Vanessa took a phone call upstairs. You know, he told me casually, Vanessa talks about you constantly. She thinks you hung the moon. I remember laughing softly at that, because at the time, I believed him. But slowly, tiny cracks started appearing beneath the surface. At dinner parties, Ethan had a habit of mentioning brands constantly. Not naturally, strategically. The Hamptons property market is exploding. We switched to a higher-tier membership club. People at our level expect certain standards. At first, I thought it was harmless professional talk. Wealthy people often discuss money the way normal families discuss weather. But Ethan treated status like oxygen. He needed everyone around him to see success every second of the day. And eventually, Vanessa started breathing the same air. One Saturday afternoon, Vanessa invited me to go shopping with her on Michigan Avenue. I was genuinely excited because we hadn't spent quality time together in weeks. Back when she was younger, shopping trips used to be our tradition. We would try on ridiculous hats, laugh at overpriced shoes, and end the day sharing cheesecake at a small cafe downtown. But that afternoon felt different from the moment I arrived. Vanessa barely looked at me when I stepped out of my car. Instead, her eyes immediately moved to my handbag. "Mom, are you still carrying that purse?" I glanced down, confused. "What's wrong with it? It's just outdated." Outdated. The word hit harder than she probably intended. Still, I tried to brush it off. As we walked through luxury stores, I noticed Vanessa behaving differently around sales associates. Her voice changed. Softer, more polished, almost performative. At one boutique, a young employee offered us sparkling water, while Vanessa tried on coats that cost more than my first apartment rent. I quietly looked at the price tag and said, "That's a little expensive for a winter coat." Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. "Mom," she whispered sharply, "please don't do that here. Do what talk about money like that?" I stared at her in confusion. "We can discuss budgets privately," she continued, lowering her voice. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing. That word stayed with me all night. Not because of the coat. Because my daughter used to admire my practicality. I taught her the value of every dollar after her father died. We survived hard years together. We clipped coupons together. We celebrated tiny victories together. Now suddenly caution was shameful. Humility was embarrassing. And somehow, I had become the problem. The deeper Ethan entered Vanessa's life, the more I felt her slipping away from me. Their wedding should have warned me. I offered to pay for a beautiful ceremony overlooking Lake Michigan. Something elegant but meaningful. Ethan wanted something bigger. Always bigger. A luxury hotel ballroom, imported flowers from Italy, a celebrity violin quartet, designer wedding favors no guest would remember a week later. The final wedding cost more than my first 2 years running Freeman Interiors. When I gently suggested scaling back, Ethan laughed and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Juliana," he said smoothly, "people remember experiences. Vanessa deserves unforgettable." At the time, Vanessa looked at him like he was magic. So I stayed quiet, because mothers often confuse sacrifice with love. After the wedding, the spending escalated rapidly. A larger condo became a gated suburban estate. One luxury SUV became 2. Then came the private club's exclusive networking events and vacations that appeared non-stop on social media. Vanessa's Instagram transformed into a glossy magazine version of her life. Perfect brunches, perfect outfits, perfect vacations, perfect marriage. But real happiness doesn't need constant advertisement, and the more perfect her online life looked, the more uneasy I became in private. One evening, I visited unexpectedly to drop off homemade soup because Vanessa had been sick. When Ethan opened the door, he looked irritated to see me. Vanessa sat curled on the couch, wearing sweatpants, her eyes red from crying. The second she saw me, she straightened immediately and forced a smile. "We're fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. Then Ethan interrupted. "Vanessa gets emotional sometimes during pregnancy. Hormones." Something about the way he answered for her bothered me deeply. Later that night, after Ethan stepped outside for a phone call, I quietly asked Sweetheart, "Are you okay?" Vanessa hesitated, just for a second. Then she smiled again. "Of course I am, Mom." But her eyes looked tired. Not physically tired, emotionally tired. Like someone constantly trying to maintain a performance they no longer had energy for. A few weeks before the baby was due, I started noticing unusual financial activity connected to Vanessa's accounts. Now, I need to explain something important. Even though Vanessa was married, many major expenses in her life still flowed through me indirectly. Not because she asked outright. Because I kept helping. The house they lived in technically belonged to a trust connected to my estate planning. I paid part of the property taxes. I covered the country club membership Ethan insisted they needed for networking. I even paid the salary of their part-time housekeeper during Vanessa's pregnancy, because I wanted her stress-free. I told myself I was supporting my daughter during an important chapter of her life. But support without boundaries becomes dependency. And dependency attracts manipulation. One afternoon, my financial advisor, Rachel Monroe, called me sounding concerned. "Juliana," she said carefully, "have you authorized multiple balance transfers connected to Vanessa's secondary accounts?" I frowned immediately. "No." Why? Rachel hesitated. "There's been a significant increase in luxury spending over the last 6 months, and several transactions appear unusually aggressive." That phrase stayed with me. Unusually aggressive. When Rachel emailed me the reports later that evening, I sat at my dining room table for nearly 2 hours, staring at numbers that made my stomach tighten. Jewelry purchases, private investment transfers, luxury travel deposits, massive credit movement. And Ethan's name appeared beside almost all of it. For the first time, I allowed myself to think something I had avoided for years. What if Ethan wasn't building a successful life? What if he was building an expensive illusion? That night, I barely slept. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet fear began forming. Not fear for my money, fear for my daughter. Because I suddenly realized Vanessa wasn't acting like a spoiled woman who hated her mother. She was acting like someone trapped inside a world she could no longer afford to maintain. And desperate people make dangerous choices. The morning Amelia was born, I woke up before sunrise like a child on Christmas morning. For a few beautiful minutes, I forgot every uncomfortable feeling I'd had over the past year. I forgot Ethan's obsession with appearances. I forgot Vanessa's coldness. I forgot the strange financial reports sitting unopened on my dining room table. All I could think about was my granddaughter, my family, my second chance at feeling close to my daughter again. I stood in my kitchen making coffee with trembling hands while snow drifted softly outside the windows. Chicago winters had always made me emotional. Maybe because they reminded me how precious warmth really is. On the chair beside me sat the gift basket I had prepared for Amelia. Inside was the pale pink blanket I knitted myself over 3 months. Tiny baby socks with little white bows. A silver bracelet engraved with her initials. And one more thing I hadn't shown anyone. An old photograph of Vanessa as a newborn sleeping against my chest in the hospital 34 years earlier. I wanted to give it to her privately, mother to mother. I honestly believed that once Vanessa held her baby in her arms, everything between us would soften again. I thought motherhood would remind her who she used to be. How deeply love can humble you. How fragile life feels the first time someone places your child in your arms. I had no idea I was driving toward the moment that would break my heart open completely. By the time I arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, my hands were shaking from excitement. I remember checking my reflection twice in the car mirror before walking inside. Not because I cared about looking impressive, but because Vanessa had become so sensitive about appearances lately. I wore a cream wool coat, light makeup, and the pearl earrings my husband once gave me on our anniversary. The maternity floor smelled like flowers, hand sanitizer, and warm blankets. Nurses moved quietly through the hallways while families whispered emotional congratulations outside patient rooms. When I reached Vanessa's room, the door was partially open. I could already hear Margaret Whitmore's voice inside. "Well, Amelia definitely has the Carter family nose." Of course, she said Carter family. Not Vanessa's. Not mine. The moment I stepped inside, everyone turned toward me. Vanessa looked exhausted, but beautiful in that fragile way new mothers often do. Her blonde hair was tied loosely back, and she held Amelia carefully against her chest. For one tiny second, I saw my little girl again. Not the polished woman from social media. Not Ethan's wife. Just my daughter. I smiled so quickly my face hurt. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered, tears already forming in my eyes. "She's perfect." Vanessa smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Ethan stood near the window, scrolling through his phone, while Margaret sat beside the bed, arranging flowers like she owned the room. I walked closer slowly, almost afraid to breathe too hard. "She's beautiful," I whispered again. Then I held out my arms gently. Every grandmother watching this story already knows that feeling, that ache, that overwhelming need to hold part of your family in your arms. Vanessa looked down at Amelia, then at Ethan, then at Margaret, and suddenly the entire energy in the room changed. "I think it's better if you don't hold her right now," Vanessa said quietly. At first, I thought I misunderstood. What her voice became colder the second time. "We're trying to limit handling." I froze completely. My arms were still slightly extended in front of me, waiting for a baby nobody intended to place there. For a moment, nobody spoke. Not Ethan, not Margaret, not me. Only the soft hospital monitor beeped beside the bed. I tried to smile through the confusion. "Oh, of course," I said gently. "I can sanitize again if you want." "That's not necessary," Margaret interrupted smoothly. Something about the way she said it made heat crawl into my chest. Vanessa adjusted the baby blanket nervously without looking at me. "We just want to be careful about the environment around her." The environment. I stared at my own daughter in disbelief. I had spent years sacrificing sleep money relationships and pieces of myself to build a safe life for her. And now suddenly, I was being spoken about like contamination. I looked toward Ethan, silently begging him to help ease the awkwardness, but he avoided my eyes completely. That hurt almost as much as Vanessa's words. Then Margaret leaned toward Vanessa and quietly whispered something she probably assumed I wouldn't hear. "Some people don't belong in every circle." I heard every single word, and so did Vanessa, because I watched guilt flash across her face for exactly 1 second before she looked away again. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like ice breaking underneath someone standing too long in the cold. I looked down at the little knitted blanket still folded in my hands and suddenly felt foolish, old-fashioned, embarrassing. Exactly the way Vanessa had been treating me for months. Still, I refused to cry in that room. I placed the gift basket carefully onto the counter beside the flowers. "I should let you rest," I whispered. Vanessa nodded too quickly. Okay. Not mom, wait, not please stay, just okay. I somehow made it to the elevator before the tears finally came. The second the doors closed, I pressed my hand over my mouth and broke apart completely. Not because I hadn't held the baby, because I finally understood something I had been avoiding for years. My daughter was ashamed of me, ashamed of my simplicity, ashamed of the life I came from, ashamed of the woman who gave her everything. I stood alone inside that elevator crying silently while strangers politely pretended not to notice. When the doors opened in the parking garage, I walked to my car in a daze. Snowflakes landed against my coat as I sat behind the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A photo notification. Ethan had already posted Amelia's birth announcement online. The picture showed Vanessa smiling in the hospital bed, while Margaret held the baby proudly beside her. Thousands of likes were already pouring in. I looked carefully at every image. I wasn't in a single one, not even accidentally. That was intentional. A family image had already been created, and I had been edited out of it. My chest physically hurt as I lowered the phone. For several minutes, I simply sat there listening to my own breathing. Then something unexpected happened. The sadness slowly began turning into clarity. Pain can blind people. But sometimes, pain finally forces you to see the truth clearly. And the truth was devastating. I had spent years funding a lifestyle that slowly erased me from my own daughter's world. The house, the cars, the memberships, the vacations, the image. I paid for all of it, and somehow, despite everything I provided, I had become unworthy of holding my own granddaughter. I wiped my face slowly, then I reached for my phone again. This time, I didn't open social media. I opened my banking app, and for the first time in my entire life as a mother, I chose myself before my daughter. My fingers trembled as I made the call. "Hello?" I said quietly when the bank representative answered. "I need to freeze several authorized accounts immediately." That night, my house felt painfully quiet. Not peaceful quiet, lonely quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your chest until you can hear your own heartbreak echoing through the walls. I walked inside carrying the untouched baby blanket basket back from the hospital. My hands still shook as I placed it carefully on the kitchen counter. The tiny silver bracelet inside reflected the soft overhead light, and suddenly, I couldn't stop staring at it. I had imagined fastening it around Amelia's wrist while Vanessa smiled beside me. Instead, I came home alone. I stood there for several minutes in my coat before finally sitting down at the dining table where Rachel's financial reports still waited. The papers suddenly looked different now. Before the hospital, I saw them as concerning. After the hospital, I saw them as truth. Pain has a way of removing denial from your life. For years, I had ignored every warning sign because I loved my daughter too much to imagine she might be using me. But now, I understood something devastating. Love without boundaries becomes permission, and I had been giving permission for a very long time. I opened my laptop slowly and logged into every account connected to Vanessa's support systems. The deeper I looked, the worse I felt. The suburban estate Vanessa and Ethan proudly called their home was technically owned by a family trust under my name. I had created it years earlier to protect Vanessa financially after my death someday. Instead, it had become part of an illusion. The luxury Range Rover Ethan drove every day, leased under my corporate account, the country club membership they flaunted online, automatically billed to me every quarter. The nanny helping Vanessa during pregnancy, paid directly through my personal banking account. Even several designer furniture purchases had quietly flowed through business expense reimbursements Ethan convinced Vanessa to request from me. I sat there staring at the numbers with a heaviness I can barely describe. Not because of the money, because every payment carried emotional meaning. Every bill represented love. Every transfer represented sacrifice. And somehow, all those sacrifices had transformed into entitlement. I remembered Vanessa crying tears of gratitude when I helped her buy her first condo years earlier. Now she spoke to me like I owed her luxury. That realization hurt more than the hospital humiliation itself. Because disrespect from strangers is painful. Disrespect from your own child changes your understanding of love completely. Around midnight, I called Daniel Brooks. Daniel had been my attorney for nearly 20 years, but more importantly, he had been my friend since college. He was the kind of man who spoke carefully, listened completely, and never panicked, unless a situation truly deserved panic. He answered on the third ring. Juliana. The moment I heard his voice, my composure almost collapsed again. I need help, I whispered. Silence. Then his tone changed immediately. What happened? I told him everything. The hospital. Vanessa refusing to let me hold Amelia. Margaret's comment. The financial concerns. The strange transactions Rachel discovered. Daniel listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. Juliana, I need you to hear me very carefully. Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. You are being financially exploited. The words landed heavily between us. Even though part of me already knew it, hearing someone else say it out loud made everything feel horrifyingly real. I don't think Vanessa understands the full extent of what's happening. Daniel continued carefully. But Ethan absolutely does. I closed my eyes. I don't want to destroy my relationship with my daughter. You're not destroying it, Daniel said quietly. You're finally refusing to finance your own mistreatment. I started crying again then. Not dramatic crying, the exhausted kind. The kind that comes from realizing you've ignored your own pain for too long. Daniel let me cry before speaking again. First thing tomorrow morning, we need to freeze discretionary financial access immediately. The sentence terrified me. Not because of the money, because I knew exactly what would happen when Vanessa realized the flow of support had stopped. For the first time in her adult life, consequences were coming, and I wasn't sure our relationship would survive them. The next morning, I forced myself to begin making calls. Every single one hurt. I contacted the bank first. My voice sounded strangely calm as I requested suspension of authorized secondary spending access tied to Vanessa's accounts. Then, I called the luxury vehicle company handling Ethan's Range Rover lease. Then, the property management office connected to the estate trust. Then the payroll service responsible for the nanny's payments. Each conversation felt surreal. Like I was dismantling my own life piece by piece. At one point, the woman from the payroll company asked politely, "Would you like us to notify the employee directly about termination?" I nearly said no. Not because I wanted to continue paying. Because I suddenly imagined Vanessa waking up exhausted with a newborn baby and discovering help disappearing around her. The image made me physically ill. But then, another image surfaced. Vanessa pulling Amelia away from my arms. We're trying to keep a certain environment around the baby. That sentence hardened something inside me again. I swallowed carefully. Yes, I told the payroll representative softly. Please notify her. After several hours, I finally closed my laptop and sat motionless in my living room. Outside, snow covered the streets in soft white silence. Inside, my entire body felt hollow. People think setting boundaries feels empowering immediately. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it feels like grief. Because when you stop overgiving to people you love, you're forced to confront a terrifying question. If I stop providing everything, will they still love me at all? 3 days passed before Vanessa finally called. I knew the exact moment she discovered the financial shutdown because my phone exploded with notifications within minutes. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. At first, I couldn't bring myself to answer. Then her name flashed across the screen again around 9:30 that night. I picked up slowly. Mom. Her voice already sounded angry. Yes. What is going on with the accounts? I stayed quiet for a second. The accounts I pay for. A long silence followed. Then came the sharpness. My card was declined today. I know. The nanny says her payments were canceled. Yes. Why would you do that to me right now? She snapped. I literally just had a baby. The pain in her voice almost broke my resolve instantly. Almost. But then I remembered standing in that hospital room, feeling like an unwanted outsider. Vanessa, I said quietly, you made it very clear that I'm not part of your family environment anymore. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything, because if there had been an innocent explanation, she would have given it immediately. Instead, she sounded trapped between guilt and pride. Finally, she sighed heavily. Mom, you're overreacting. That sentence changed something inside me permanently. Overreacting, as if my humiliation had been imaginary, as if my pain was inconvenient instead of real. For years, I had protected Vanessa from consequences because I thought love meant endless sacrifice. But in that moment, for the first time in my life, I understood something different. Love without respect eventually becomes self-destruction, and I was finally too exhausted to destroy myself anymore. After that first phone call, Vanessa stopped pretending everything was fine. The polite mask disappeared completely. Over the next 48 hours, my phone became a battlefield. At first, the messages sounded panicked. Mom, something's wrong with the accounts. Then frustrated. You didn't answer my last call. Then furious. How could you do this right after I gave birth? By the second night, the text became cruel. I can't believe you're making this about yourself. You're punishing your granddaughter. Normal mothers don't act like this. That last sentence stayed with me for hours. Normal mothers. I wondered how many normal mothers spent decades sacrificing sleep-freedom relationships and peace to build comfortable lives for children who eventually learned to measure love in dollars. Still, despite everything, part of me kept hoping Vanessa would calm down, that she would realize how deeply she hurt me, that maybe she would call simply to apologize. Instead, around 11 that night, my phone rang again. And this time, Ethan was on the line too. Vanessa's breathing sounded shaky when I answered. Mom, she said immediately the mortgage payment didn't go through. I closed my eyes slowly. The property belongs to the trust, Vanessa. You've never stopped payments before. You've also never treated me like a stranger before. Silence. Then Ethan's voice entered the conversation smoothly. Juliana, he said calmly, I think emotions are clouding everybody's judgment right now. That sentence irritated me instantly. Not because it was loud, because it was controlled. Men like Ethan always sound calm while dismantling other people emotionally. My judgment feels very clear these days, I replied. He gave a soft laugh. No one intended to offend you at the hospital. I gripped the phone tighter. No one intended to defend me either. Another pause. Then Ethan shifted strategies immediately. We're exhausted new parents trying to adjust, he said. Vanessa's under tremendous stress. Surely you understand that. There it was, The guilt, the manipulation, the attempt to make me feel selfish for reacting to my own humiliation. For years, that strategy worked beautifully on me. Not anymore. I do understand stress, I said quietly. I raised Vanessa alone after burying my husband. The line went silent. Then Vanessa suddenly snapped. Why do you always bring Dad into everything? The cruelty of that question physically stunned me. Because her father was the entire reason I worked myself into exhaustion for most of my adult life. Everything Vanessa had came from sacrifices made after his death. And somehow, over time, my sacrifices had become invisible to her. Vanessa? I said softly, trying one last time to reach her emotionally. Do you have any idea how much it hurt when you wouldn't let me hold Amelia? Her voice hardened immediately. You're exaggerating. That sentence cut deeper than she probably realized. Not because it dismissed the moment, because it dismissed me, my pain, my humanity. You stood there like I was dirty, I whispered. Oh my God, Mom, nobody said that. You didn't have to. Ethan interrupted again before Vanessa could respond. Juliana, I think everyone would benefit from taking a step back emotionally. There was something almost rehearsed about the way he spoke. Too polished, too careful. As though he had handled situations like this before. Then his tone changed slightly. We all want stability for Amelia. I frowned. What does that mean? It means, Ethan continued smoothly. This isn't the ideal time to create financial chaos. And there it was. Finally. Not concern about family. Not concern about reconciliation. Money. Everything always circled back to money. The silence stretched so long that Vanessa eventually spoke again, quieter this time. We can't maintain things right now without help. Maintain things, not survive, not eat, not care for the baby. Maintain things, their image, their lifestyle, their performance. I suddenly pictured the giant house, the imported furniture, the luxury memberships, the endless online photos pretending perfection. And for the first time, anger rose stronger than guilt. Vanessa, I asked carefully, what exactly can't you maintain? Neither of them answered immediately. That silence told me more than any confession ever could. Finally, Ethan sighed. We built a certain standard of living. No, I replied calmly. I built it. Complete silence. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I heard something unfamiliar in Ethan's breathing. Nervousness. The next morning, Rachel Monroe came to my house with printed financial statements spread across 3 folders. Snow fell softly outside while we sat at my dining table reviewing transaction histories that made my stomach twist tighter by the minute. Rachel adjusted her glasses carefully. Juliana, I need to ask something difficult. I nodded weakly. Okay. Did you authorize Ethan Carter to move funds between secondary accounts connected to Vanessa No? Rachel slid several pages toward me. There are repeated patterns here. I studied the statement slowly. Large, luxury purchases, investment transfers, cash movement between accounts I barely recognized. Then I saw something that made my chest tighten completely. My signature, or something pretending to be my signature. I stared at the page for several seconds before whispering, "That's not mine." Rachel looked relieved and worried at the same time. I didn't think so. Cold fear moved through my body, because suddenly this situation no longer felt emotionally unhealthy. It felt dangerous. Rachel pointed toward several highlighted transfers. These accounts are over-leveraged, aggressively. I frowned. Explain that to me like I'm 5? She gave me a sympathetic smile. It means someone is spending money they don't actually have while trying to maintain the appearance that they do. My mind immediately went to Ethan. The expensive watches, the networking clubs. The obsession with visible wealth. The constant pressure to look successful. And then another memory surfaced. One evening, months earlier, I had accidentally overheard Ethan arguing with someone on the phone outside Vanessa's house. "I just need more time," he hissed quietly. "The liquidity situation is temporary." At the time, I ignored it. Now I understood. Temporary liquidity problems usually mean one thing: debt. Possibly enormous debt. That afternoon, Daniel Brooks joined us. The second he reviewed the documents, his expression darkened. "This is worse than I expected," he said quietly. I felt suddenly nauseous. How bad Daniel looked directly at me. "I think Ethan may have been using Vanessa's accounts and possibly your connected assets to support high-risk financial behavior." "Illegal, potentially." The room spun slightly. Even then, despite everything, my first instinct was still to protect Vanessa. "She doesn't understand finances well," I whispered immediately. "She probably trusted him." Daniel nodded slowly. "I believe that too." That sentence nearly broke me. Because underneath all my anger, a terrible realization was forming. Vanessa hadn't simply become spoiled. She had become emotionally dependent on a man obsessed with status and terrified of failure. And somewhere along the way, she learned to value appearances more than love. The saddest part, I helped create that environment every time I paid another bill, instead of forcing accountability. I looked down at the hospital photo still sitting beside my kitchen counter. The one Ethan posted online. Perfect smiles, perfect image, perfect lie. Then Daniel asked the question I had been avoiding completely. "Juliana, if this escalates legally, are you prepared for the possibility that Vanessa may blame you before she blames Ethan?" The question hit brutally hard because I already knew the answer. Yes, at least for now. Because children raised without boundaries often mistake rescue for love. And the moment rescue stops, they call it betrayal. I pressed my palms together tightly to stop them shaking. Then I looked at both of them and quietly said something I never imagined I'd say about my own daughter. "I think Ethan convinced Vanessa that my only value is what I pay for." The silence afterward felt unbearably heavy, because nobody in the room believed I was wrong. For the next week, my life became divided into two painful realities. The first reality was emotional. I was still a mother, grieving the slow destruction of her relationship with her only child. The second reality was legal. And legal realities don't care about emotions. Every morning, Rachel Monroe arrived with new financial documents. Every afternoon, Daniel Brooks called with additional concerns. The deeper they investigated Ethan's financial behavior, the darker everything became. What terrified me most was how carefully constructed the illusion had been. From the outside, Vanessa and Ethan looked wildly successful. Luxury home, luxury cars, country club dinners, vacation photos in Aspen and Napa Valley, designer clothes, exclusive parties, but underneath the polished surface was something fragile and unstable. Debt. Massive debt. Rachel explained it to me slowly one morning while we reviewed spreadsheets at my kitchen table. "Ethan keeps moving money to cover older losses," she said. "It's like stacking furniture against a collapsing wall." I rubbed my forehead tiredly. "How bad is it?" She hesitated. "Bad enough that he likely needed continued access to your assets to maintain appearances?" That sentence made my stomach twist. Not because of the money, because it confirmed my deepest fear. I wasn't being loved. I was being used as financial oxygen. 3 days later, Daniel uncovered the first undeniable evidence of fraud. I still remember the exact expression on his face when he arrived at my house, carrying a leather folder under his arm. Not angry, serious. That frightened me more. He sat across from me quietly and opened the folder. Inside were loan authorization forms connected to a luxury investment account. And there, at the bottom of several pages, sat my forged signature. For a moment, I genuinely couldn't breathe. My eyes kept moving across the page, trying to convince myself I was misunderstanding something. "That's impossible," I whispered. Daniel nodded grimly. "I already verified it." I stared at the signatures again. They looked close enough to fool someone quickly, but not close enough to fool me, because I knew every curve of my own handwriting. "This was submitted electronically 6 months ago," Daniel explained. "The account leveraged your trust assets as secondary financial support." I looked up slowly. "You mean Ethan used my estate as collateral?" Daniel's silence answered before his words did. "Yes." The room suddenly felt freezing cold. All I could think about was Vanessa. Did she know? Did she sign something blindly? Did Ethan manipulate her completely, or worse? Had she known all along that thought hurt so badly? I immediately pushed it away. Rachel spoke gently from beside me. "I honestly don't think Vanessa understands the legal severity of what he's doing." I wanted desperately to believe her. Because if Vanessa knowingly participated in financial fraud against me, I wasn't sure my heart would survive it. That evening, I made the mistake of checking social media. Vanessa had posted a new photograph of Amelia wearing an expensive cream-colored baby outfit beside a caption about gratitude and family blessings. Thousands of people commented about how perfect their lives looked. Perfect couple. Perfect baby. Perfect family. I stared at the image for a long time. Then something painful hit me. Vanessa looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. There was tension hidden behind her smile now, a strain around her eyes, as though maintaining the performance had become heavier than she expected. For years, I believed wealth created security. But now I was watching wealth destroy peace in real time. A few minutes later, my phone rang unexpectedly. Vanessa. I hesitated before answering. This time, her voice sounded different, less angry, more frantic. "Mom," she whispered. Immediately, my instincts softened. "What happened?" "The hospital bills are getting complicated." I closed my eyes. Not because I didn't care, because I knew this conversation wasn't really about hospital bills. It was about collapse beginning quietly around her. "I thought Ethan handled your insurance?" I said carefully. "He does," she replied quickly. "It's just, there are temporary issues." Temporary issues. The exact same language Ethan used during that overheard phone call months earlier. My chest tightened. "Vanessa," I asked softly, "how much debt are you two actually in?" Silence. Then immediate defensiveness. "Why would you ask that?" "Because nothing about this situation feels normal anymore." I heard her breathing shake slightly. Then Ethan's voice appeared faintly in the background, asking who she was talking to. Vanessa immediately changed tones. "I have to go." Before hanging up, she whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. "I didn't think things would get this bad." Then the line disconnected, and for the first time since the hospital, fear became stronger than anger inside me. The next breakthrough came from Rachel. Late Friday afternoon, she called asking me to come into her office immediately. When I arrived downtown, she closed the office door behind me and lowered her voice. "I found something connected to Ethan's investment activity." She turned her computer screen toward me. At first, the information meant nothing. Numbers, account names, transfer histories. Then Rachel highlighted several transactions linked to cryptocurrency losses and private speculative investments. The losses totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. I physically sat back in my chair. How is that possible? He kept reinvesting after losses, Rachel explained, trying to recover quickly. My mind immediately flashed back to Ethan's obsession with status. The watches, the luxury clubs, the nonstop networking, the pressure to look wealthy. Suddenly, everything made terrible sense. Ethan wasn't rich. Ethan was desperate to appear rich. And desperation makes people dangerous. Rachel continued carefully. There's more. She handed me printed communication records tied to one investment account. Several messages referenced needing continued support access connected to family assets. Family assets. Me. I felt sick. For years, I believed I was helping my daughter build a beautiful life. Now I realized I may have been financing a collapsing fantasy designed to hide Ethan's failures. But the worst part still wasn't the money. The worst part was imagining Vanessa trapped inside that pressure every day, trying to maintain perfection, trying to impress Ethan, trying to belong in a world constantly threatening to reject her. And suddenly, through all my anger, I remembered the frightened little girl who once asked me what would happen if I died too. That little girl wasn't gone completely. She was buried underneath fear, insecurity, and manipulation. The realization made tears fill my eyes instantly. Rachel touched my hand gently. Juliana, I know you still want to protect her. I nodded weakly. She's still my daughter. Rachel's expression softened. Then protect her properly this time. Those words stayed with me long after I left her office. That night, I sat alone in my living room staring at the old photograph of Vanessa as a newborn. In the picture, I looked exhausted, terrified, and deeply happy all at once. Back then, love felt simple. Feed her, protect her, hold her close. Now love felt impossible. Because protecting Vanessa might require destroying the illusion she built her entire adult life around. And I wasn't sure she would ever forgive me for that. Around midnight, Daniel called again. We may need to prepare for legal escalation, he said quietly. My heart sank immediately. Against Ethan. Yes. I closed my eyes. Will Vanessa be involved? Another painful silence. Possibly. After we ended the call, I sat in darkness for a very long time thinking about one terrible truth. Children don't wake up one morning and become strangers. It happens slowly, one compromise at a time, one ignored red flag at a time, one sacrificed boundary at a time. And somewhere along the way, both Vanessa and I lost ourselves. But for the first time since Amelia's birth, I finally understood something clearly. Saving my daughter would not look like rescuing her financially anymore. It would look like forcing the truth into the light, even if she hated me for it first. 2 weeks after Amelia's birth, Vanessa called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded softer than it had in days. Mom, she said carefully, maybe we should have dinner. For one dangerous moment, hope rushed into me so quickly it almost hurt. Hope is cruel like that. It survives even after humiliation, even after betrayal, even after silence. I stood in my kitchen gripping the phone tightly while imagining all the things this dinner could mean. Maybe Vanessa finally wanted to apologize. Maybe she missed me. Maybe becoming a mother was beginning to change her. What kind of dinner? I asked quietly. At the house, she replied. Just family. Family. That word alone nearly made me cry. I said yes, immediately. The second the call ended, I hated myself a little for how fast I agreed. Because deep down, something inside me already knew this dinner wasn't truly about reconciliation. It was about pressure. And unfortunately, I was right. The night of the dinner snow covered the Carter estate, in thick white silence. I parked slowly outside the massive stone house I had partially paid for and sat in my car for a full minute before going inside. The windows glowed warmly against the dark winter sky, making the home look peaceful from the outside. But appearances had become the Carter family specialty. The moment Ethan opened the front door, I sensed the tension immediately. Too much politeness. Too much preparation. People preparing for emotional ambushes always become overly controlled. Juliana Ethan greeted smoothly. "Glad you came." Inside, the dining room looked almost staged. Candles, expensive wine, perfectly arranged plates. Margaret Whitmore already sat at the table wearing a pale cashmere sweater and an expression that practically radiated judgment. Vanessa stood near the kitchen holding Amelia stiffly against her shoulder. The second I saw my granddaughter, my heart softened automatically. That instinct still frightened me. No matter how deeply Vanessa hurt me, love kept surviving anyway. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered carefully. Vanessa nodded awkwardly. "Hi, Mom. Nobody offered me the baby. Not even for a second." I tried not to let the rejection show on my face as I sat down quietly. Dinner began with painfully forced small talk. Weather, the baby's sleep schedule, traffic downtown. Nobody mentioned the real issue sitting heavily at the center of the table. Money. Then halfway through dinner, Margaret finally placed her wineglass down and sighed dramatically. "Well," she said smoothly, "I think we all know why we're here." There it was. Not reconciliation, intervention. Margaret folded her hands elegantly. "Juliana, everyone understands emotions were high at the hospital. I stayed quiet, but punishing Vanessa financially right after childbirth feels unnecessarily cruel." Cruel. Interesting choice of word. I looked directly at her. "Did refusing to let me hold my granddaughter feel compassionate?" Margaret's expression tightened instantly. "That's not what happened. It's exactly what happened." Vanessa finally spoke. "Mom, can we please not make this dramatic?" The sentence stunned me. Dramatic, as though my pain was performance instead of reality. Ethan leaned back calmly beside her. "We're trying to move forward," he said carefully. "But the financial disruptions are creating instability." Again, not emotional damage, not family healing, financial disruptions. I suddenly noticed something strange. Vanessa looked nervous every time Ethan spoke. Not annoyed, not angry, nervous. Like she was monitoring his reactions constantly. The realization unsettled me deeply. Margaret continued speaking before I could process the thought. "The baby deserves consistency," she said. "Surely you understand that?" I almost laughed from disbelief. Consistency. I had been the only consistent thing in Vanessa's life for 34 years. I buried her father, built a company, paid for school, bought homes, covered emergencies, protected her endlessly. And now suddenly, I was being lectured about stability by people who treated love like a financial arrangement. I looked directly at Vanessa. "Do you honestly believe I deserve the way you treated me?" For a second, real guilt appeared in her eyes. But before she could answer, Ethan spoke again. "We all regret misunderstandings. Misunderings. He kept minimizing everything intentionally. That's what manipulators do. If pain becomes miscommunication, then nobody has to take accountability." I stared at him carefully. Then I noticed something else. Ethan looked tired. Really tired. Dark circles under his eyes, tension around his jaw, tiny cracks appearing beneath the polished image. For the first time, I realized something important. He was scared too. Dinner deteriorated quickly after that. Vanessa barely touched her food, while Margaret continued making passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. You know, pride can destroy families. Children need forgiveness modeled around them. A grandmother's role should be supportive. Every sentence carried the same hidden message. Resume funding our lifestyle. Finally, Ethan set his napkin down and looked directly at me. Juliana, he said calmly, we need practical solutions. I folded my hands quietly. What kind of practical solutions? The mortgage situation needs immediate resolution. There it was again. The house. Always the house. I suddenly realized none of them had asked how I was emotionally handling any of this. Not once. Not one person at that table asked whether I had cried after leaving the hospital, whether I felt hurt, whether I felt abandoned. Only finances mattered. That realization hurt more deeply than I expected. Then Ethan made a mistake. A very important mistake. Without your support, he said carefully, Vanessa has nothing protecting her current quality of life. The second the words left his mouth, silence swallowed the room. Even Vanessa looked shocked, because he accidentally revealed the truth. This was never about family healing. It was about maintaining an image. I looked slowly toward my daughter, and for the first time, I saw embarrassment on her face instead of anger. Not embarrassment toward me. Toward him. Toward the truth slipping into the open. Then Margaret immediately tried to recover the situation. That's not what he meant. But it was exactly what he meant, and everyone at the table knew it. I leaned back quietly. You know what hurts the most? I asked softly. Nobody answered. I spent years believing my generosity came from love. I looked directly at Vanessa, but now I realize it may have prevented you from learning how to stand on your own. Tears immediately filled Vanessa's eyes. For a second, she looked like my little girl again. Fragile, lost, ashamed. Then Ethan touched her arm gently, and just like that the wall returned around her face. The conversation ended badly. Vanessa started crying quietly while Ethan insisted everyone was overwhelmed. Margaret acted offended that I refused to restart payments immediately. And somewhere in the middle of the chaos, something inside me finally became emotionally exhausted. Not angry, not heartbroken. Done. Completely done carrying everyone else emotionally while nobody carried me. As I stood to leave, Vanessa finally spoke. Mom, please. I turned slowly toward her. Her eyes looked desperate now. Not manipulative, afraid. For one dangerous second, I almost gave in. Then I remembered the forged signatures, the financial fraud, the hospital humiliation, the years of subtle shame. And I realized rescuing Vanessa again would only bury her deeper inside Ethan's world. So instead of arguing further, I simply picked up my purse quietly. But before leaving, I reached inside my coat pocket and pressed one small button on my phone screen. Record stopped. Because from the second dinner began, I had recorded everything. Every manipulation, every financial demand, every accidental confession, especially Ethan's sentence. Without your support, Vanessa has nothing. I didn't fully know how Daniel would use the recording yet, but instinct told me I would need it. As I stepped outside into the freezing Chicago night, snowflakes landed softly against my coat, while my heart pounded painfully inside my chest. Behind me sat the family I spent my entire life protecting. And for the first time, I finally accepted something devastating. Some people don't truly panic when they lose your love. They panic when they lose access to what your love provides. That realization followed me all the way home. The legal letters went out on a Tuesday morning. I remember staring at the snowfall outside my kitchen window while Daniel Brooks reviewed the final documents one last time across from me. Even after everything that had happened, my hands still trembled. Not because I doubted the truth, Because mothers are conditioned to protect their children even when those children are hurting them. Daniel slid the paperwork carefully into his leather briefcase. Once these are delivered, he said gently, things are going to move quickly. I swallowed hard. What exactly happens next? He exhaled slowly. The property trust protections activate. Vehicle lease responsibility transfers. Financial access investigations begin. And Ethan will realize you're no longer emotionally negotiating. That sentence sat heavily in my chest. Emotionally negotiating. That's exactly what I had been doing for years. Every boundary I ignored. Every inappropriate request I excused. Every painful comment I swallowed quietly. I kept negotiating against my own dignity because I was terrified of losing my daughter's love. But the truth was devastatingly simple now. I had already lost it long before the hospital room. By noon, the notices had been delivered. And by 12:17 p.m., Vanessa called, screaming. You sent lawyers to my house. I closed my eyes immediately at the sound of her voice. Not because I regretted anything, because pain still rushed through me every time she sounded distressed. Vanessa. No, she snapped. Don't act calm right now. Do you have any idea what you've done? I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter tightly. I'm protecting myself. From what, your own family? The irony of that question almost took my breath away. My own family stopped treating me like family a long time ago? She ignored the statement completely. The mortgage office called. Yes. The Range Rover lease company called. Yes. The trust attorney contacted Ethan. Yes. Each answer made her breathing grow more frantic. Then finally came the sentence I knew was coming. You're humiliating us. There it was, not hurting us, not abandoning us, humiliating us. Because image still mattered more than truth inside Vanessa's world. I leaned against the counter tiredly. Vanessa, do you understand how serious the financial situation actually is? Silence, then defensive anger again. Ethan says you're overreacting because you're emotional. I laughed softly before I could stop myself. Not because anything felt funny, because I finally understood the pattern clearly. Every time reality threatened Ethan, he blamed emotion. Emotion made me unreasonable. Emotion made Vanessa dependent. Emotion explained every problem while conveniently avoiding accountability. Did Ethan tell you about the forged signatures? I asked quietly. The silence afterward felt endless. Then Vanessa spoke much more softly. What signatures? And suddenly, for the first time in weeks, genuine fear moved through me completely. An hour later, Daniel and I sat inside his office, waiting for Vanessa to arrive. I never imagined one day I would discuss my own daughter in legal terms. But life has a cruel way of forcing impossible moments onto ordinary people. When Vanessa finally entered the office, she looked nothing like the polished woman from social media. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she looked young again. Not glamorous, not curated, just overwhelmed. The second she saw me, anger returned to her face immediately. You involved attorneys before even talking to me. I stared at her carefully. I tried talking to you for months. That's not fair. No, I replied quietly. What happened at the hospital wasn't fair. Vanessa looked away instantly. Daniel gently interrupted before emotions exploded further. Vanessa, there are financial documents connected to Ethan that require immediate clarification. She folded her arms tightly. What documents? Daniel slid several papers across the desk. I watched her expression carefully as she scanned the pages. Confusion, then disbelief, then visible panic. What is this? These are authorization forms connected to leveraged accounts, Daniel explained calmly. Vanessa's eyes widened. I never saw these before. Your name appears throughout the documentation. She looked up immediately. Because Ethan handles investments. The second she said it, Daniel and I exchanged a glance. Not because we judged her. Because that sentence explained everything. Trust without oversight. Dependence disguised as partnership. Emotional manipulation disguised as sophistication. Vanessa kept staring at the papers like they were written in another language. Then quietly, almost like a child again, she whispered, "Mom, what's happening?" And despite all my pain, hearing fear in my daughter's voice shattered something inside me again. The worst moment came 30 minutes later. Daniel carefully explained the potential financial exposure connected to Ethan's accounts, including the possibility of fraud investigations if the forged authorizations escalated further. Vanessa turned physically pale. "No," she whispered repeatedly. No, Ethan wouldn't. But her voice lacked certainty now. I watched her entire reality begin cracking apart in real time. And strangely, it didn't make me feel victorious. It made me feel heartbroken. Because underneath the expensive clothes and defensive behavior, Vanessa still looked like the little girl who used to climb into my lap after nightmares. Only now, the nightmare was her own life. Then Daniel asked gently, "Vanessa, do you personally know the full amount of debt tied to your household right now?" Silence. Long silence. Finally, she whispered, "Not exactly." That answer terrified me more than anything else, because it meant Ethan had built their life on information she didn't fully control. And suddenly, every memory from the past 2 years looked different to me. The nervousness around money conversations. The forced perfection online. The anxiety hiding behind her eyes. Even the hospital moment. What if Vanessa wasn't rejecting me because she truly hated me? What if she was terrified of disrupting the fragile image Ethan needed to maintain? Then another horrifying thought surfaced. What if Ethan isolated her from me intentionally because I represented reality? The idea made my stomach twist painfully. Vanessa suddenly looked up at me with tears filling her eyes. "Mom, are we losing the house?" I should have answered strategically. Carefully. Instead, I answered honestly. "I don't know yet." The fear on her face after that sentence nearly destroyed me. That evening, Ethan disappeared. Vanessa called him repeatedly while sitting inside Daniel's office conference room, but every call went directly to voicemail. At first, she sounded irritated, then worried, then terrified. "He never turns his phone off," she whispered. Rachel Monroe arrived shortly afterward, carrying updated account activity reports. The second she reviewed recent transactions, her expression darkened immediately. "He's moving money." Vanessa looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" Rachel hesitated carefully. "It means Ethan may be trying to protect assets before legal review expands." Vanessa stared blankly. No, that doesn't make sense." But it did make sense. Perfect sense. Because desperate people run when illusions collapse. For the first time since Amelia's birth, I watched Vanessa stop defending Ethan automatically. Not because she suddenly trusted me completely, because reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Then her phone buzzed, a text message from Ethan. I watched her hands begin shaking before she even opened it. Finally, she whispered aloud, "Need time to think. Don't involve me in your mother's emotional war." The room went completely silent. Your mother's emotional war. Even now, Ethan still framed everything as my emotional instability instead of his financial deception. Vanessa read the message 3 more times before finally lowering the phone slowly. And in that moment, I saw something heartbreaking happen. The version of Ethan she loved began dying inside her eyes. Not all at once, but enough to hurt, enough to scare her, enough to finally make her question everything. That night, after Vanessa left Daniel's office carrying Amelia in exhausted silence, I sat alone in my car for nearly 20 minutes, unable to drive home. Chicago glowed around me in cold winter lights while snow drifted softly across the windshield. I should have felt justified, validated, victorious. Instead, I felt grief. Because exposing the truth doesn't erase love. It simply forces love to survive reality. And reality had become uglier than I ever imagined. My daughter was drowning inside a life built on performance. My granddaughter had entered a family collapsing under secrets. And somewhere beneath all the anger, I finally admitted something terrifying to myself. I wasn't just fighting to protect my finances anymore. I was fighting to save Vanessa before Ethan's lies destroyed what remained of her life completely. Ethan finally came home 3 days later. I didn't know immediately. Vanessa called me around 6 a.m, sounding like someone who hadn't slept in days. Her voice shook before she even spoke. "He's here." I sat upright in bed instantly. "Are you okay?" Long silence. Then quietly, "I don't know anymore." That answer broke my heart more than yelling ever could, because confusion means trust is dying slowly. And nothing hurts more than realizing the person you built your future around may not exist the way you believed. Outside my bedroom window, Chicago sat buried beneath gray winter clouds, while I listened to my daughter breathe shakily into the phone. "Did he explain where he went?" I asked gently. "He said he needed space." I closed my eyes. People needing space after financial fraud accusations usually aren't searching for emotional clarity. They're searching for exits. "What else did he say?" Vanessa hesitated. "He said you're trying to destroy our marriage." There it was again, everything reduced to my emotions. My overreaction, my instability, never his actions. I spoke carefully. "Vanessa, has Ethan ever shown you the full financial records for your household?" "No." Why not another long silence? Because deep down, she already knew the answer. Later that afternoon, Rachel Monroe called with another discovery. This time, even her normally calm voice sounded unsettled. "Juliana," she said quietly, "I think Ethan has been hiding much more than debt." My stomach tightened immediately. Rachel forwarded several files to my email while speaking. At first, I didn't fully understand what I was looking at. Then, patterns began appearing. Private messages, account transfers, travel bookings, hidden expenses routed through secondary investment accounts, and one recurring name attached to multiple transactions. Claire Donovan. I frowned immediately. "Who is Claire Donovan?" Rachel hesitated. "I believe she works with Ethan professionally, but the tone in her voice suggested something deeper." Within 30 minutes, Daniel Brooks arrived at my house to review the findings personally. The second he saw the documents, his jaw tightened. This isn't just financial misconduct anymore. Cold fear moved through me instantly. "What are you saying?" Daniel looked at me carefully. "I think Ethan has been maintaining another relationship." I physically sat back in my chair. Not because wealthy men having affairs shocked me, because suddenly Vanessa's exhaustion made terrible sense. The emotional distance, the constant pressure to look perfect, the fear underneath her behavior. She wasn't living inside a loving marriage. She was performing inside a fragile business arrangement disguised as one. Rachel pointed toward several expense reports. Luxury hotel bookings, gifts, Flights, hidden transfers. My chest hurt thinking about Vanessa at home, caring for a newborn baby, while Ethan spent money chasing validation somewhere else. And suddenly, my anger toward him became something darker. Disgust. That evening, I drove to Vanessa's house for the first time since the hospital. Not because she invited me. Because something deep inside me said she shouldn't be alone. The mansion looked strangely cold despite its size. Too large. Too quiet. Too polished to feel like a real family home anymore. Vanessa opened the door, wearing oversized sweatpants and no makeup. Amelia rested against her shoulder, while soft crying echoed somewhere deep behind her eyes. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, she stepped aside and let me enter. That simple gesture nearly made me cry. Inside the house looked different now. Not glamorous. Empty. The illusion had cracked enough that I could finally see the loneliness underneath it. Baby bottles sat unwashed near the sink. Laundry covered part of the sofa. Vanessa's hair looked unbrushed. Real life had entered the mansion at last. And somehow, reality looked healthier than perfection ever did. Ethan wasn't home. "Where is he?" I asked carefully. He said he had meetings. The bitterness in her voice answered the real question. Vanessa sat down slowly while holding Amelia close against her chest. "She cries almost every night, between 2 and 4 in the morning," she whispered. I didn't know babies could feel this exhausting. Something inside me softened instantly, because beneath all the anger and mistakes, she was still a new mother drowning emotionally. I moved closer carefully. "Do you want me to hold her while you rest for a minute?" The room went completely silent after I asked. Vanessa looked at me slowly, then at Amelia, then back at me. And for one painful second, I saw shame flash across her face, because she remembered the hospital too. Instead of handing me the baby, Vanessa suddenly started crying. Not delicate crying, breaking apart crying, the kind that comes after someone spends too long pretending they're okay. "I don't understand what happened to my life," she whispered. I sat beside her quietly while Amelia slept against her chest. For several minutes, I simply listened. Then the words started pouring out of her. The pressure, the expectations, the constant need to appear successful around Ethan's social circle, the fear of disappointing him, the embarrassment she felt whenever Ethan criticized ordinary lifestyles. "He always said image matters," Vanessa whispered shakily. "That people judge weakness." I closed my eyes briefly, because I remembered those exact same words from Ethan years earlier. People respect success they can see. Vanessa wiped tears from her face. I thought if I became polished enough, successful enough, he'd finally relax. My heart broke hearing that sentence. Because women shrink themselves every day trying to become lovable to emotionally hungry men. And the saddest part? It never works. Nothing satisfies people addicted to appearances. "They always want more," I whispered softly. Vanessa looked at me sharply, like part of her suddenly realized I understood much more than she expected. Then quietly, almost like a frightened child again, she asked Mom, "Do you think he ever actually loved me?" No mother is prepared for that question, especially not when the answer might destroy her daughter completely. I chose my words carefully. "I think Ethan loved what your life with him represented." The tears returned immediately after that, because deep down, she already knew. Before leaving that night, I finally told Vanessa about Claire Donovan. At first, she stared at me blankly. Then denial appeared instantly. "No, I hated myself for continuing. There are financial records connected to her. That doesn't mean anything. Vanessa? He wouldn't do that to me, but her voice lacked conviction now. I handed her printed copies quietly. Hotel charges, luxury gifts, travel confirmations, hidden account activity. I watched her entire body go still while reading. Then came the worst moment. She recognized one hotel date immediately. That weekend, she whispered. I frowned gently. What he told me he was in Boston for investor meetings. The room felt unbearably quiet after that. Vanessa kept staring at the papers like they might rearrange themselves into a different truth if she looked long enough. Then suddenly, she laughed once. A horrible, broken little laugh. "Oh my God," she whispered. I moved toward her instinctively. But before I could speak, she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "I pushed you away for him." The sentence shattered something inside me completely. Because underneath all the drama, all the money, all the manipulation, that was the deepest tragedy of all. My daughter abandoned the people who truly loved her, while desperately trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it honestly. Vanessa lowered her face into her hands and sobbed, while Amelia stirred softly against her chest. And sitting there beside her, I realized something heartbreaking. The woman who refused to let me hold my granddaughter at the hospital was finally disappearing. Not because punishment changed her. Because reality finally reached her before Ethan's illusion destroyed her completely. The collapse happened faster than I expected. Once the illusion cracked, everything that had been held together by money and appearances began falling apart almost immediately. 3 days after Vanessa discovered the truth about Claire Donovan, the first visible consequence arrived in broad daylight. I was standing inside my kitchen making tea when my phone rang. Vanessa. Again. But this time, she wasn't crying. She sounded numb. "Mom," she whispered. They took the car. I closed my eyes slowly. Outside my window, snow melted quietly beneath pale Chicago sunlight, while my daughter sat somewhere inside a collapsing version of her life. "The Range Rover?" I asked softly. "Yes." I could hear Amelia crying faintly in the background. And Ethan Long, silence. Then he left before it happened. Of course he did. Men obsessed with appearances rarely stay present for consequences. I leaned against the kitchen counter while grief and anger mixed painfully inside my chest. Not because the SUV mattered. Because years earlier, Vanessa used to call me excited over tiny victories. A good grade, a promotion, a cheap apartment she decorated herself. Back then, happiness felt real. Now she sounded emotionally destroyed over a luxury vehicle being repossessed from a driveway. That's what performative wealth does. It trains people to confuse possessions with identity, and when the possessions disappear, they no longer know who they are. Later that afternoon, I drove to the house again. This time, the atmosphere felt completely different. No expensive candles burning. No polished music playing softly through hidden speakers. No staged perfection. The mansion finally looked like what it truly was, a very expensive shell filled with exhausted people. Vanessa opened the door wearing the same sweatshirt from 2 days earlier. Her eyes looked swollen from crying, and Amelia rested against her chest wrapped in a plain blanket instead of the designer baby outfits Ethan loved posting online. For the first time in months, my daughter looked human again. Not curated, human. Inside the house, unopened mail covered part of the dining table. Final notices, payment warnings, legal correspondence, reality. Vanessa sat heavily on the couch while Amelia fussed softly. "I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time," she whispered. I watched her carefully rock the baby. "You need help." At first, she didn't answer. Then quietly, I fired the night nurse. The sentence stunned me. Not because she finally stopped spending money. Because I realized Vanessa had probably never truly been alone with motherhood before now. For months, there had always been help, assistance, nannies, services, luxury support systems. But now the systems were disappearing one by one. And underneath all the expensive lifestyle choices sat a frightened young mother trying desperately not to drown. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted finally. The honesty in her voice nearly broke me. Because pride had been stripped away enough for truth to survive again. That evening, something happened I will never forget. Around midnight, Vanessa called, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Mom?" She won't stop crying. I grabbed my coat immediately. By the time I reached the house 20 minutes later, Vanessa sat on the nursery floor, trembling with exhaustion, while Amelia screamed in her arms. The giant luxury nursery looked surreal around them. Designer wallpaper, imported furniture, a crystal chandelier. And in the middle of all that expensive perfection sat my daughter looking completely lost. The second she saw me, she broke down harder. "I've tried everything." I knelt beside her quietly. "Give her to me for a minute." For one painful second, Vanessa froze. Not because she didn't want to, because the hospital memory still haunted both of us. Then slowly, carefully, she placed Amelia into my arms. The moment my granddaughter settled against my chest, something inside me shattered completely. She was warm, tiny, perfect. I had waited weeks for that moment, and instead of feeling triumphant, I only felt sadness for how much pain it took to get there. I gently rocked Amelia while humming the same lullaby I used to sing to Vanessa after nightmares. Within minutes, the crying softened, then stopped. Vanessa stared at me silently with tears streaming down her face. "How did you do that?" I smiled weakly. "I used to do this with you too." That sentence destroyed her. She covered her face and started sobbing again. "I'm sorry," she whispered repeatedly. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to forgive everything instantly. Every insult, every humiliation, every moment she treated me like I didn't belong. But healing doesn't happen in one emotional night. And boundaries built too late still matter. So instead, I simply held Amelia quietly while my daughter cried beside me like the frightened little girl she used to be." The next morning, another piece of Vanessa's old life disappeared. Her closest social friends stopped calling. At first, she pretended not to notice. But I noticed. No more brunch invitations. No more baby gift baskets from influencer friends. No more social media comments celebrating perfect motherhood. People who build friendships around status usually disappear when status disappears too. Vanessa finally admitted it during breakfast while staring blankly at her phone. "I think they all know." I poured coffee slowly. "Know what?" "That everything's falling apart." The vulnerability in her voice hurt deeply. Because for years, Vanessa had built her entire identity around being admired. Now suddenly, she was invisible to the same people she tried so desperately to impress. A few hours later, Sophia Turner visited unexpectedly. Sophia had been Vanessa's closest friend long before Ethan entered her life. I always liked her because she valued honesty more than appearances. The moment Sophia walked into the kitchen, she hugged Vanessa tightly without saying a word. And that simple, genuine hug made Vanessa cry again. Sophia glanced toward me carefully. "She needs real people around her right now." Real people. Interesting phrase. Because fake lives eventually expose fake relationships too. Later, while Vanessa showered upstairs, Sophia sat beside me quietly at the kitchen table. She changed so much after marrying him, Sophia whispered. I nodded slowly. I know. Sophia looked toward the staircase before lowering her voice further. You know Ethan used to criticize her constantly, right? My stomach tightened instantly. What kind of criticism? Everything, Sophia said bitterly. Her clothes, her weight after pregnancy, her family background, even the way she talked. Cold anger moved through me immediately. Sophia continued quietly. He made her feel like she constantly needed upgrading, and suddenly everything made horrifying sense. Vanessa didn't reject me because she truly thought I was beneath her. She rejected me because Ethan trained her to fear anything that looked ordinary, including the woman who raised her. That night, after everyone left, Vanessa sat quietly beside me on the living room sofa, while Amelia slept nearby. The giant mansion felt emptier than ever now, like a stage after the audience goes home. I don't think I ever really knew who Ethan was, Vanessa whispered. I looked at her carefully. Sometimes we don't notice manipulation when it arrives, wrapped in admiration. She stared down at her hands. I thought if I became everything he wanted, he'd finally make me feel secure. My heart hurt hearing that, because women destroy themselves every day trying to earn emotional safety from emotionally hollow people. Vanessa swallowed hard. And I hurt you trying to keep him happy. There it was. Finally. Truth without excuses, truth without blame, truth without performance. I looked at my daughter for a very long moment before answering softly. Yes, you did. The tears returned to her eyes immediately, but this time she didn't defend herself. And strangely, that honesty gave me more hope than any apology ever could. Because healing only begins when denial finally ends. 3 weeks after Ethan disappeared emotionally from the marriage, Vanessa came to my house alone. No luxury SUV, no designer handbag, no carefully styled hair. Just my daughter standing quietly on my front porch, holding Amelia in one arm and a diaper bag in the other. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Cold February wind moved softly through the trees, while snow melted slowly along the sidewalks of my quiet neighborhood. Vanessa looked exhausted, not the temporary exhaustion of sleepless nights, the deeper kind, the kind that comes after illusions collapse and reality finally settles over your life. I didn't know where else to go, she whispered. That sentence nearly shattered me, because once upon a time, my home had always been the first place she ran to. Then, somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing me as safety. I stepped aside quietly. Come inside. The second she entered, Amelia stirred softly against her shoulder, while the familiar scent of coffee and cinnamon filled the hallway. Vanessa paused near the kitchen and looked around slowly. Everything inside my home remained simple. Warm blankets, old family photographs, bookshelves filled with years of memories. Nothing impressive, nothing curated. And suddenly, I realized something painful. For years, Vanessa had mistaken simplicity for lack of value. Now, simplicity probably felt like peace. I made tea while Vanessa sat silently at the kitchen table. The same kitchen table where she once colored pictures as a little girl, while I worked late into the night beside her. Life is strange that way. You spend decades trying to move forward, only to realize the moments that mattered most were often the simplest ones. Vanessa looked down at her hands for a long time before finally speaking. I used to think this house felt small. I glanced toward her quietly. And now her eyes filled slightly with tears. Now it feels safe. The honesty in her voice hurt more than anger ever could, because it revealed how emotionally unsafe her marriage had truly become. I sat across from her carefully. How long have you been unhappy? Vanessa laughed softly. Not a happy laugh. The kind people make when truth feels embarrassing. I don't even know anymore. She stared toward the window. At first, Ethan made me feel special, important, like I was becoming part of something bigger. I stayed quiet and let her continue. Everything with him felt polished, expensive, impressive. I thought that meant successful. Her voice shook slightly, but eventually, it started feeling like I was constantly being evaluated. That sentence settled heavily between us. Evaluated. Not loved. Not supported. Measured. Women know that feeling intimately. The exhausting pressure to stay beautiful enough, polished enough, impressive enough to deserve affection. Vanessa swallowed hard. He always noticed flaws first. My chest tightened immediately. What kind of flaws? She gave another broken little laugh. My clothes weren't sophisticated enough. My hair looked too casual. My family background wasn't refined enough. Then finally, barely above a whisper. You weren't refined enough. There it was. The truth underneath everything. Not hatred, conditioning. Ethan taught her to associate warmth with weakness and simplicity with embarrassment. And slowly, she began viewing me through his eyes instead of her own. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile anymore, just sad. Eventually, Vanessa looked up at me with tears filling her eyes. The hospital? She whispered. I felt my entire body tense instinctively. She noticed immediately. I replay it in my head every night. I looked down into my tea quietly. Why did you do it? The question came out softer than I intended. Not angry, wounded. Vanessa covered her mouth briefly before answering. Margaret kept warning me before the birth. Warning you about what she said appearances matter. That families like theirs protect image carefully. That too many emotional people around the baby would create instability. I stared at her in disbelief. Emotional people? Vanessa nodded weakly. She always made comments about you being too ordinary. The sentence should have enraged me. Instead, it simply exhausted me. Because I finally understood how deeply Vanessa had been surrounded by emotional poison. She said if Ethan's business connections saw too much messiness around us, people would judge. I leaned back slowly. So you pushed me away to impress people who don't actually care about you. The tears started falling immediately down her face. Yes, at least it was honest. Painful honesty still hurts. But honesty opens doors that denial keeps locked forever. Vanessa wiped her cheeks shakily. The second I saw your face in that hospital room, I knew I'd done something horrible. I looked away quickly before my own tears surfaced. Then why didn't you stop? Her answer came instantly. Because Ethan was watching me. That sentence changed something inside me permanently. Because suddenly, the hospital memory looked different. Not excused, but different. Vanessa wasn't acting powerful in that moment. She was acting afraid. Afraid of disappointing the man whose approval controlled her entire emotional world. And fear makes people betray the ones who love them most. Later that afternoon, while Amelia slept upstairs in my guest room, Vanessa and I sat together in the living room surrounded by old family photo albums. At first, we opened them quietly. Then slowly, memories began returning between us. Birthday parties, school concerts, Christmas mornings. One photograph stopped Vanessa completely. She stared silently at an old picture of me standing beside my first tiny interior design office. Back then, I looked exhausted, young, determined. Vanessa sat on my hip, smiling proudly into the camera. I remember this day, she whispered. I smiled faintly. You spilled apple juice on my client paperwork. For the first time in weeks, Vanessa actually laughed softly. Then her expression crumbled again. You gave me everything, she whispered. I looked at her carefully. I gave you too much. She frowned immediately. What do you mean? I took a slow breath before answering honestly. I protected you from consequences so often that you stopped recognizing unhealthy behavior. The words hurt to say because they implicated me too. Parents rarely realize when love becomes overprotection. We think we're helping. Sometimes we're simply delaying growth. Vanessa looked down quietly. I thought love meant someone always rescuing me. I nodded slowly. That's because I taught you that. Tears filled both our eyes then. Not because either of us was evil, because both of us had confused sacrifice with healthy love for far too long. After a long silence, Vanessa finally whispered the question I knew was coming. Can you ever forgive me? The room suddenly felt unbearably still. I looked toward the staircase where Amelia slept peacefully upstairs, then back at my daughter. The truthful answer mattered more than the comforting answer. I don't know yet, I admitted softly. Pain flashed across her face instantly, but she nodded anyway. Because healing built on honesty lasts longer than forgiveness forced too quickly. Before leaving that evening, Vanessa stood near the front door, holding Amelia quietly against her chest. The sunlight outside had begun fading into soft winter darkness. For a moment, she looked exactly like the young mother I used to be after losing my husband. Scared, overwhelmed, trying not to fall apart. Mom, she whispered. Yes, she hesitated before speaking again. I think I spent years trying to become someone Ethan would respect. I stayed quiet. Then she looked directly into my eyes, for the first time in what felt like forever. And somewhere along the way, I stopped respecting the people who actually loved me. The tears I'd been holding back all afternoon finally surfaced then. Because that sentence told me something important. My daughter was finally waking up emotionally. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to see the truth. And sometimes, truth is the first real step home. Ethan came back 4 days later demanding money. Not apologizing, not explaining, demanding. I was in Daniel Brooks' office reviewing updated legal paperwork when Vanessa's number flashed across my phone again. The second I answered, I heard panic in her breathing. Mom? He's here. Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. Are you safe? He's angry. I stood immediately while Daniel looked up sharply from across the desk. What happened? Vanessa lowered her voice. He found out the trust lawyers froze access completely. Of course he did. Men like Ethan remain calm only while they believe they still control the outcome. The moment control disappears, so does the charm. I'm coming over, I said immediately. Mom, I'm already leaving. Daniel stood before I even finished the sentence. You're not going alone. The drive across Chicago felt endless. Gray clouds covered the city, while cold rain struck the windshield in uneven bursts. Beside me, Daniel reviewed printed documents silently, including the forged signatures, financial records, and the audio transcript from the dinner I recorded weeks earlier. Everything had led to this moment. Every manipulation, every lie, every humiliation. And somewhere deep inside me fear settled heavily into my chest. Not fear for money anymore. Fear for Vanessa. Because women emotionally trapped inside controlling relationships often break in unpredictable ways once the illusion collapses completely. When we arrived at the house, Ethan's black sedan sat crookedly in the driveway like he parked it carelessly in anger. That alone told me everything. Control was slipping from him. Inside the house, shouting echoed through the foyer before we even entered the living room. You let your mother poison everything. Ethan's voice no longer sounded polished. It sounded desperate. Vanessa stood near the staircase, holding Amelia tightly against her chest, while Ethan paced across the room with flushed cheeks and wild eyes. The second he saw me, his expression darkened instantly. Well, he snapped bitterly, here comes the real problem. Daniel stepped slightly forward beside me. Careful, Ethan. Ethan laughed harshly. Oh, now she needs legal protection from family. Interesting word, coming from a man who forged financial documents tied to his wife's mother. Vanessa looked exhausted beyond words. Dark circles shadowed her eyes while Amelia fussed softly against her shoulder. Please stop yelling, she whispered. But Ethan barely looked at her. His attention remained locked on me. You destroyed our lives over hurt feelings. I stared at him quietly. No, your lies destroyed your life. That sentence hit him visibly, because truth terrifies people who survive through image management. Ethan pointed aggressively toward me. You cut off financial support immediately after the hospital because your ego got bruised. I almost laughed from disbelief. My ego. This man spent years building an entire personality around appearances, status, and social validation. But somehow my pain was ego. Daniel calmly opened his folder. The financial fraud investigation says otherwise. For the first time since we arrived, real fear flickered across Ethan's face. Small, fast, but visible. He tried recovering immediately. You have no proof of intentional misconduct. Daniel slowly placed copies of the forged documents across the coffee table. Actually, we do. The room went silent. Vanessa stared toward the papers without moving. Ethan didn't touch them. Didn't even look down fully. Because guilty people already know what the evidence says. Daniel continued speaking evenly. These signatures were verified as fraudulent. Multiple accounts leveraged trust-connected assets under false authorization. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're twisting financial strategy into criminal behavior. No, Daniel replied calmly. You did that yourself? The tension inside the room felt unbearable. Amelia started crying harder while Vanessa gently rocked her back and forth, trembling visibly. Then Ethan suddenly shifted tactics. Manipulators often do that when logic fails. They become emotional. You think any of this happened because I'm evil? He snapped toward Vanessa. I built this life for us. Vanessa stared at him silently. You liked the house. Silence. You liked the vacations. Silence again. You liked being admired. That one landed. Because it was partially true. Vanessa had participated in the illusion. Not the fraud, but the fantasy. And now shame covered her entire face. Ethan moved closer toward her. I gave you everything. Something inside me snapped hearing that. No, I said sharply. You gave her pressure, debt, fear, and a fake version of success built on lies. Ethan looked at me with open hatred then. Not annoyance, hatred. Because manipulative people despise anyone who exposes reality clearly. You always hated me, he said coldly. No, I answered honestly. I just saw through you earlier than Vanessa did. That sentence finally broke his composure completely. He laughed bitterly and dragged a hand through his hair. You know what your real problem is, Juliana. You couldn't stand not being the center of Vanessa's life anymore. The accusation would have destroyed me months earlier. Now, it only exhausted me. Because emotionally immature people always confuse boundaries with selfishness. Vanessa suddenly spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Stop." Her voice sounded quiet but firm. Ethan turned toward her immediately. "You're really siding with her right now?" Vanessa swallowed hard. She didn't forge documents. The silence after that sentence felt enormous. Ethan stared at her like he genuinely never expected resistance from her. That realization alone broke my heart, because it meant Vanessa had probably spent years agreeing, accommodating, softening herself to avoid conflict with him. He stepped closer again. "You think your mother actually cares about you? She humiliated us publicly." Vanessa's eyes filled instantly. "No," she whispered shakily. "You humiliated us." That was the moment everything changed. Not legally, emotionally, because for the first time, my daughter stopped defending the illusion. Ethan looked stunned, then furious. "You ungrateful enough," Daniel interrupted sharply. The room froze. Daniel slowly removed another document from his folder. "The recorded dinner conversation has already been legally preserved." Ethan went pale instantly. "You recorded me?" I looked directly at him. I protected myself. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Daniel calmly continued. "The recording includes financial coercion, acknowledgement of dependency on Juliana's assets, and manipulative pressure surrounding continued support." Ethan looked trapped now, cornered, and cornered people become dangerous emotionally. Suddenly, he turned toward Vanessa again, with frightening intensity. "You think you survive without me?" That sentence hit me harder than yelling ever could, because healthy love never sounds like survival threats. Vanessa stared at him quietly, while Amelia cried softly between them. And then through tears, my daughter finally said the words I'd waited months to hear. "You used me." Ethan looked genuinely shocked, not guilty, shocked, as though he truly believed his manipulation counted as love. For a moment, nobody moved. Rain struck the windows softly while the giant house sat wrapped in tension and silence. Then Ethan grabbed his coat violently from the sofa. "This family deserves each other," he muttered bitterly. And just like that, he walked out the front door. No apology, no accountability, only anger that the performance had ended. Vanessa collapsed onto the couch crying the second the door slammed shut. I moved toward her instinctively, while Amelia whimpered softly against her chest. And for the first time in months, my daughter leaned into my arms instead of away from them. Not because everything was healed, not because trust fully returned, but because the illusion was finally dead. And sometimes healing only begins after the lies stop breathing. 3 months after Ethan walked out of the house, Vanessa moved into a small apartment on the north side of Chicago. Not a luxury condo, not a gated estate, just a modest 2-bedroom apartment above a quiet bakery with old wooden floors and windows that rattled slightly whenever winter wind pushed against the glass. The first time I visited, Vanessa looked embarrassed opening the door. "I know it's small," she said quickly. I stepped inside, slowly looking around at the tiny kitchen, the mismatched furniture, and Amelia's crib squeezed carefully into the corner of the living room. And strangely, the apartment felt warmer than the mansion ever did. Because warmth doesn't come from expensive things, it comes from emotional safety. Vanessa still looked exhausted most days, but something about her had softened. The tension around her eyes had eased. The constant need to impress invisible people had started disappearing. For the first time in years, she looked like someone breathing normally again. Not performing, living. She found part-time work with a small marketing agency downtown. The salary was nowhere near the lifestyle she once flaunted online, but every paycheck mattered deeply to her now. One evening, while we folded baby clothes together, she quietly admitted something that stayed with me. I never realized how disconnected I was from real life. I looked up carefully. "What do you mean?" Vanessa stared down at Amelia's tiny socks in her hands. "I used to spend thousands of dollars without thinking. But last week, I stood in a grocery store comparing prices for 20 minutes. There was no arrogance in her voice anymore, only humility. And strangely, humility made her stronger than luxury ever did. The hardest adjustment wasn't the apartment, or the reduced income, or even losing social status. It was motherhood without performance. No filters, no staged family photos, no expensive distractions covering emotional emptiness, just sleepless nights crying babies and real responsibility. And real responsibility changes people if they allow it to. Some nights, Vanessa still called me crying from exhaustion. Some nights, Amelia screamed for hours because of teething. Some nights, bills overwhelmed her. But instead of hiding behind curated perfection, she finally started asking for help honestly. Not entitlement, not manipulation, honesty. And that changed everything between us. I helped with Amelia often but carefully. Very carefully. That part mattered, because I refused to rebuild our relationship through unhealthy dependence again. When Vanessa needed groceries one difficult week, I helped her create a budget instead of simply handing her money. When she panicked about daycare costs, I helped research affordable programs instead of automatically paying for private care. When she felt overwhelmed emotionally, I listened instead of rescuing immediately. At first, she struggled with that. Years of being financially protected had trained her to expect instant solutions. Now, she had to learn resilience. One rainy afternoon, while Amelia napped beside us, Vanessa suddenly looked at me and said, "You're treating me differently." I smiled softly. "Yes. Because you don't trust me?" I shook my head slowly. "No. Because I finally respect you enough to let you become stronger." That sentence made her cry quietly. Not from hurt, from understanding. Because deep down, she finally recognized the difference between love and enabling. Healing happened slowly after that, painfully slowly. Some days, we laughed together over old memories while cooking dinner. Other days, awkward silence returned between us unexpectedly. Trauma doesn't disappear simply because people apologize. Certain memories still lingered painfully between us, especially the hospital. Even months later, I sometimes woke up remembering the feeling of my granddaughter being pulled away from my arms. And Vanessa remembered it too. I could see it every time the subject almost surfaced between us, before quickly disappearing again. One afternoon near the beginning of spring, Sophia Turner joined us for lunch at the apartment. Sunlight poured through the windows, while Amelia crawled clumsily across a blanket on the floor. Sophia watched Vanessa carefully for several minutes before smiling softly. "You seem lighter?" Vanessa looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes." Sophia answered immediately. "You used to look tense all the time." Vanessa laughed quietly. "I was tense all the time." Then her expression became thoughtful. "I spent years trying to become someone other people admired." Sophia glanced toward me knowingly. And now Vanessa looked down at Amelia playing with a stuffed rabbit. "Now, I just want my daughter to grow up feeling emotionally safe." That sentence nearly brought tears to my eyes, because emotional safety was exactly what Ethan stole from her for years. And now, she finally understood its value. Later that evening, after Sophia left, Vanessa stood washing dishes quietly while I played with Amelia nearby. Without turning around, she suddenly asked Mom, "Do you think I'm a bad person?" The vulnerability in her voice hurt deeply. I set Amelia gently onto my lap before answering carefully, "No." Vanessa stayed silent. I think you became emotionally lost, I continued softly. And emotionally lost people sometimes hurt the people who love them most. Tears filled her eyes immediately. I hate who I became. I walked toward her slowly. No, I whispered. You hate who you became while trying to earn love from the wrong person. That distinction mattered, because shame destroys growth, but accountability creates it. Vanessa cried quietly against my shoulder for several minutes while the kitchen filled with soft evening light. For the first time in a very long time, holding my daughter didn't feel painful. It felt healing. Not complete healing, but real healing. And real healing is rarely dramatic. Usually it looks small. A conversation without defensiveness, a quiet apology, a moment of honesty, a mother and daughter learning each other again after years of emotional distance. Still, one thing remained unfinished between us. Neither of us had fully confronted the deepest wound yet. The hospital. The moment everything broke apart. Sometimes I caught Vanessa watching me hold Amelia now with sadness in her eyes, like she was replaying that memory constantly inside her head. One night, after putting Amelia to sleep, Vanessa finally whispered, "I still can't believe I did that to you." The apartment became very quiet after those words. I looked toward the sleeping baby monitor softly glowing beside the couch. Then, back at my daughter. "You were afraid," I said gently. Vanessa shook her head immediately. "That doesn't excuse it." "No," I admitted softly. "It doesn't." Tears filled her eyes again. "But fear changes people." She looked down into her hands. "I thought if I disappointed Ethan, everything would fall apart." I moved closer carefully. "And what do you think now?" Vanessa let out a shaky breath. "I think everything was already falling apart long before the hospital." For a while, neither of us spoke. Then finally, quietly, she said the words I never expected to hear. "I want Amelia to know the version of you I forgot." That sentence broke something open inside my chest. Because after everything, all the humiliation, all the manipulation, all the heartbreak, my daughter still wanted healing too, and maybe that was enough for hope to survive. Almost a year after Amelia was born, Vanessa came to my house on a quiet Sunday morning in October. The trees outside glowed gold and amber beneath soft Chicago sunlight, while cold autumn air drifted gently through the neighborhood. I was standing in the kitchen baking cinnamon bread when I heard the knock at the front door. The moment I opened it, my heart tightened unexpectedly. Vanessa stood there holding Amelia on her hip. No designer coat, no luxury handbag, no polished performance. Just my daughter and my granddaughter. For a second, none of us spoke. Then Amelia reached both tiny arms toward me automatically and smiled. That simple gesture nearly destroyed me. Because children recognize love before adults do. "Hi, Mom," Vanessa whispered softly. I stepped aside immediately. "Come in." The house smelled like cinnamon coffee and warm bread cooling on the counter. Amelia laughed happily the second Vanessa placed her down on the living room rug beside a basket of old toys I had quietly collected over the past year. Watching my granddaughter crawl across my floor felt surreal after everything that happened. There was a time I thought I might never know her at all. Vanessa stood near the kitchen doorway, silently watching me interact with Amelia. And for the first time since the hospital, there was no fear or tension in her face. Only emotion. Real emotion. "I used to think this house felt too simple," she admitted quietly. I smiled faintly while helping Amelia stack wooden blocks. "And now?" Vanessa looked around slowly. "Now it feels like home." Those words healed something inside me I didn't realize was still bleeding. We spent most of the afternoon together quietly. No dramatic conversations, no legal discussions, no arguments about money, just ordinary moments. Amelia throwing cereal onto the floor. Vanessa helping me fold laundry. Soft music playing in the kitchen. For years, Vanessa chased extraordinary appearances while overlooking ordinary peace. Now she finally seemed able to recognize the difference. At one point, while I prepared lunch, I noticed Vanessa staring at an old photograph hanging beside the dining room. The picture showed me holding her as a little girl after her first dance recital. She couldn't have been older than 7. "You kept all these pictures up?" she whispered. Of course I did. Even after everything, I never stopped being her mother. That's the painful thing about motherhood. Children can distance themselves. Children can disappoint you. Children can wound you deeply. But love rarely leaves completely. It changes shape. It becomes cautious, boundaried, wiser. But it survives. Later that afternoon, Amelia fell asleep against my shoulder, while sunlight poured softly through the living room windows. I sat motionless, terrified of waking her. Her tiny fingers curled against my sweater, while soft baby breaths warmed my neck. And suddenly, without warning, tears filled my eyes. Because this was the moment I had imagined the day she was born. Not luxury, not perfection, not curated family images. Just this. Love without performance. Across the room, Vanessa watched me silently. Then slowly, she walked over and sat beside me on the couch. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "I'm ashamed of who I was." I looked down at Amelia, sleeping peacefully between us. "You were hurting." Vanessa shook her head immediately. "No, I was selfish." The honesty in her voice hurt because it was real. She wiped tears from her cheeks carefully before continuing. "When Ethan came into my life, I started believing love had to be earned through status, through image, through becoming impressive enough. I listened quietly, and somewhere along the way," her voice broke slightly, "I started treating your kindness like an endless resource instead of a gift." That sentence landed heavily inside my chest, because that was exactly what happened. Not just financially, emotionally. For years I kept giving pieces of myself away, hoping love would remain safe between us. Instead, my silence taught Vanessa that my needs mattered less than everyone else's comfort. She looked toward me carefully. "I don't expect you to trust me completely again." I appreciated that honesty more than she probably realized. Because healing without accountability is just denial wearing softer clothes. Vanessa took a slow breath. "But I want to spend the rest of my life becoming someone Amelia can be proud of." I glanced down at my granddaughter sleeping peacefully, then back at my daughter. "You already started." That made her cry immediately. Not dramatic crying, relieved crying. The kind that comes when someone finally stops running from themselves. After dinner, the 3 of us sat on the back porch wrapped in blankets, while cold autumn wind moved gently through the trees. Amelia laughed every time leaves blew across the yard. Vanessa smiled watching her. Then quietly, almost nervously, she said, "There's something I need to do." I looked at her carefully. Without another word, Vanessa stood up slowly and lifted Amelia into her arms. Then she turned toward me, and for one suspended moment, the entire world seemed to hold still. Because we both knew exactly what this moment meant. Vanessa walked toward me with tears already forming in her eyes. Then, softly, carefully, she placed Amelia into my arms. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, out of trust. The exact trust she once denied me in that hospital room. My hands trembled slightly as I held my granddaughter against my chest. And suddenly, all the pain from that day came rushing back. The humiliation, the rejection, the loneliness. But this time, something else existed beside the pain. Healing. Vanessa knelt beside my chair, crying openly now. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I will regret that hospital room for the rest of my life." I reached for her hand while holding Amelia close. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then finally, honestly, I whispered, "I forgave you long before I could say it out loud." Vanessa broke down completely after that, and somehow so did I. Not because everything returned to the way it used to be. It didn't. Some things never fully return after they break. But maybe healthy love isn't about returning backward. Maybe it's about rebuilding honestly, with truth, with boundaries, with respect. Over time, Ethan disappeared completely from our lives, except through occasional legal updates from Daniel Brooks. Several financial investigations continued quietly behind the scenes, but I stopped centering my emotional world around his destruction. Because healing required looking forward, not backward. Vanessa kept working, kept rebuilding, kept learning how to live honestly instead of perform beautifully. And slowly, little by little, she became emotionally stronger than the version of herself who once lived inside luxury. As for me, I learned something too. Love should never require abandoning your dignity. Not for a spouse, not for family, not even for your own child. Because when people truly love you, they may make mistakes. But they will never demand your self-respect as the price of staying in their lives. That was the lesson my daughter and I both learned the hard way. And maybe that's why on quiet Sunday mornings now, when Amelia crawls into my lap laughing while Vanessa drinks coffee beside me in peaceful silence, it feels more valuable than every luxury we ever lost. Sometimes the people we love most hurt us not because they are evil, but because they become lost chasing approval status or emotional validation from the wrong places. As parents, we often believe unconditional love means endless sacrifice. But real love must also include boundaries, self-respect, and honesty. For years, I confused rescuing my daughter with protecting her. In reality, I was preventing her from facing truths she desperately needed to learn. And Vanessa confused appearances with happiness until she nearly lost herself, completely trying to become someone worthy in another person's eyes. Money can create comfort, but it cannot create emotional safety. Luxury can impress strangers, but it cannot heal loneliness. And no amount of status can replace the peace that comes from being loved honestly for who you truly are. Sometimes healing begins only after illusions collapse. Sometimes families rebuild stronger after painful truth finally enters the room. And sometimes, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the hurt. It means choosing to grow beyond it together. If this story touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between protecting your peace and keeping someone happy? And if you're a parent, what lesson do you hope your children never learn the hard way? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this one. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read far more comments than you probably realize.